Hi.
You're out of luck because it's part of the setup over there.
Good morning. I'm channeling Kelly. Hi, my name's Melissa Bush, and I am your song leader for this morning. So if we could start with our gathering hymn. If you would all rise and body your spirit, and hopefully the music, there we are. Oh, I woke up this morning, and it's number 153 if you want to look in the gray hymnal, if you need to see the music. I woke up this morning with my mind, it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Singing and praying with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Singing and praying with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Singing and praying with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Thank you. Please be seated.
So in preparation for being with you today, I read over the UUA 7 principles, and they're really beautifully stated. And one of the ways that I heard it characterized was it's like a bud that starts with the individual being sacred and worthy of love and attention, and then it goes through the process of reaching out to others until finally you're part of the sacred web of creation. So I'd like to start with that bud, and even pre-bud. If you take your hands and put them in front of you like this, and this is, before the bud is a bud, it's a rock. And it weighs heavy in your chest and on your heart, in your gut, and you squeeze tight. These are the things that keep you awake at night. These are broken relationships. This is unresolved grief. You should be squeezing, and you should feel the pain of that. And your fingers are starting to turn a little bit red, maybe a little white. And then very slowly, the Spirit is calling you to turn that rock, that stone heart, into something made of flesh, and you open your fingers and you begin to feel the blood coming in and the freedom. This was Mitzrayim, the narrow place where we were slaves, and then all of a sudden we're being led out of slavery into freedom. That's our invocation for today. That's our prayer. May it be so.
We have some July birthdays. Can I welcome Acer Black and Ash Black up to the podium so that we can light our chalice? And won't you, the congregation, please join me in saying the chalice lighting words that are up here. We kindle this flame, symbol of our faith, for the
light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of love, which calls us to work for justice.
Ably done, thank you. Look what you've overcome to get here. Look at the distance you've run. The doubts that you've pushed down, the fear that you've drowned out when they said that it couldn't be done. Thank you, Tim McGraw and Lori McKenna, for these words, which were written for last year's documentary, Free Solo. They put us right on the face of Yosemite's El Capitan rock formation with free climber Alex Honnold. And they tell us something about gravity, which is to say that they tell us something about the things we think are limits in our lives. Sometimes these forces restrict us, and we yearn to defy them, right? Defy is the word we use. We defy gravity like it's not the boss of us. But gravity also grounds us. Gravity is useful, even, maybe especially, to the climber. Maybe it's not a question of defying gravity so much as working with it, within it, and around it. In your head, in your heart, and in your hands, in your head, in your heart, in your hands, in your head, in your heart, and in your hands. Gravity's a fragile thing. My name is Jillian Kong-Sivert, and it is my pleasure to serve as your worship associate this morning. Our monthly theme is freedom and responsibility. While our settled minister, Reverend Andy, is out of the pulpit, we have the pleasure of welcoming guest preacher, Reverend Doug Bland. Many of us have gotten to know Doug well from our work with Arizona Interfaith Power and Light, and he has something to tell us about gravity this morning. It's one of our community's great joys that we almost always have guests among us. If you're visiting for the first or second or third time, can I please ask you to stand as you're able so that we can greet you now and get to know you more fully after the service? Won't you please stand? Thank you so much. Some of our workshops and groups are on hiatus for the summer, but a good entry point is the Welcome Circle. And some of us will be set up at a table outside after the service to answer your questions in the shade. And in true fashion, to question your answers. So grab a coffee and some refreshments after the service, and we'll draw that circle wide. If you came here hurting this morning, our lay pastoral care associate is Roz Hawkins, resplendent in purple. This morning, will you please raise your hand? She'll be over by the consultation room, to your right, my left, after the service with a listening ear. Lots of the children are in summer programming, and this service is always intergenerational. Our younger congregants are always welcome. But if the service ends up being too much for some, there's a comfort room to your right, my left. It's soundproof, but there's a speaker in there so you won't miss any of the service. Welcome into the service. And now won't you please rise and body your spirit as we sing together hymn 1018, the Teal hymnal. Come and go with me to that land.
Come and go with me
to that land. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land.
say in our church that the offering is a sacrament of the free church. And what we mean by that is that we believe it is a blessing to be able to govern and support our religious community ourselves, to make possible by our generosity everything we dream of and do to live out our shared values. Every week we lift up the spiritual value of generosity by taking an offering for the ministries of the church. Our plate then, as it is passed among us, becomes filled with the evidence of that generosity. It is our harvest, gathered in every week for what most nourishes us. Will the ushers please receive the offering?
I'd like to invite the children forward for our time for all ages, and if you have a donation, I'll have our donation collection chalice for you too. So this morning, when we go to class, the grown-ups are going to talk about some things that made me think about taking chances in life. Is it easy when you think about, I'm going to take a chance to do something different? What do you guys think? Easy, or is it kind of hard on your brain sometimes to decide? And sometimes when we have an opportunity to try something new or different, and we step back and we say, no, I don't think so, who knows what it would have been like? Maybe it would have been scary, but maybe it would have been fantastic too. So I found a story for you today about maybe deciding to take some of those opportunities. So this kid says, one day I got a chance. It seemed to just kind of show up and act like it knew me, as if it wanted something. I didn't know why it was there. What do you do with a chance, I wondered. It kind of circled around me, as if it wanted me to reach out and grab it, and our pictures will come back, right, Libby? I started to reach for it, but I was unsure. So I pulled back a little bit, and it flew away, my chance. I thought about it afterwards quite a bit. I wish I had taken that chance. I realize now that I wanted that chance, but I just don't know if I had the courage. So when another chance came around, I wasn't sure, but I decided to try. I went to reach for it, but I missed and fell, and I felt embarrassed. It seemed like everyone was looking at me. I decided I never wanted to feel that way again. So after that, anytime a chance came along, I just kind of ignored it. And the more I ignored those chances, the less they came around. Then I started to worry, what if I never get another chance? I know I acted like I didn't care, but the truth was I did, and I was just afraid. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be brave enough. And then I thought, well, maybe I don't have to be brave all the time. Maybe I just need to be a little bit brave at the right time. So I promised myself if I ever got another chance, I wasn't going to hold back. I was going to take that chance. And then one sort of just ordinary old day, I saw something kind of shining in the distance. Is it possible, I thought? Could this be my chance, I hoped? I had to find out. It wasn't that I wasn't afraid, but my excitement got bigger than my fear. This time I was ready. So as that chance came by, I reached out and I grabbed it. It felt so good to soar, to fly, to be free. And now I see when I was holding back, I was missing out. And I don't want to miss out anymore. So what should I do when a chance is there? I should take it, and so should you, because it might just be the start of something incredible. Do you think it's a good idea to just take every chance, every opportunity you get in front of you? Yes. Okay. If you're standing near a big cliff, should you take that chance and step off? No, so we should use our brain a little bit, right? But if somebody needs help, and maybe we think, I don't know that person at school, maybe another kid, should you maybe think about helping them if it's a kid at school and it's safe? I think so. We should think about it, right? All right, I think we're gonna sing the kids out.
It's our tradition to sing the children out under a bridge of love. If you can come together and form a London bridge to this little light of mine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. May be seated.
Now we're going to enter into a time of centering and meditation. I'm going to sing Spirit of Life in Spanish first, and then won't you please join me, stay seated, in English. Fuente de amor, ven hacia mí y al corazón tu compasión sopla al volar, sube en la mar hasta moldear la justicia de la vida. Arraigame, libérame, fuente de amor, ven a mí, ven a mí. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots holy cross, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. God of mercy, Spirit who makes peace out of war, who wanders with refugees and keeps vigil with children at our border, at all borders. Holy healer in hospitals and shelters, at schools, in homes, at weddings, and in airplanes. May your love be balm for all the hurt. May your truth be present in offices of power and in the hearts of soldiers and civilians alike. Many times we've thought the arc was bending toward justice. Many times we saw it happen in courtrooms and in streets, in the hearts of people creating their own liberation. Many times we've also doubted. For those of us this morning who doubt, who despair that brokenness and suffering and war may win, remind us of the small mercies, the tiny triumphs. Hope does dwell in the world.
Thank you, David. Well, as I've thought about the theme of freedom and responsibility, I've wrestled with a lot of different abstractions in my life. And what kept coming back to me again and again is not abstractions, but the people in my life who embodied either freedom without responsibility, sort of license, or freedom with responsibility, who sort of incarnated those powerful words. So instead of giving you abstractions today, I'd like to tell you a story about two of those people that were important for me in shaping my understanding about freedom and responsibility. Now, I need to give you a warning. The measure of a good story is people hear it and they think, oh, I remember a time when, or I remember a person that. So at the end of my story, I want you to be reflecting on people in your life who embodied those words, those ideas. My hometown of Twin Falls, Idaho is famous not just for potatoes. It's also famous for Shoshone Falls. 212 feet high, almost 1,000 feet wide. And then overlooking the falls, there's the jump site. When in 1973, Evel Knievel made his attempt to jump over the Snake River Canyon. So that's Twin Falls, Idaho, my hometown. On the way into town on Highway 93, there's a sign that has been replaced many times and repaired many times. It says, "Welcome to Twin Falls, Idaho, home of Shoshone Falls, higher than Niagara." But no matter how many times it's been replaced and repaired and the vandalism has been corrected, somebody is always coming along and scratching out one of the legs of the N. So it says, "higher than Viagra." The measure of a man. That is the question. So there are a number of different ways that when I was growing up, we tested our testosterone. One of them was hunting. It was a part of a gun culture in Idaho, and fathers would take their sons out. Sometimes mothers would take their daughters out. They'd go hunting in the fall for rooster pheasants. And then kids would come to school with these long, beautiful, tapered rooster tail feathers. And we'd wear them in our hat, or we'd make a pen out of them. And I really wanted one of those feathers. But I was never good at hunting because I could somehow see their eyes. Even if the pheasant was a long ways away or the deer was around the corner, I could see their eyes. So I was never a good hunter. My father was never very helpful around the house with my mother because he said his role was not housework. He was in charge of truck maintenance. Twice, I remember he took me out to try to teach me how to drain the crankcase of its oil, and both times we drained the transmission fluid. The primary way that you would prove yourself as a real man was on the athletic field. So I went out for football and basketball and track and cross country, and I know what you're thinking. He was short, but I was also very slow. So I could tell you a dozen stories of my failure to prove myself on the athletic field, but I'll just tell you one. Robert Stewart Junior High is standing O'Leary Junior High. O'Leary always wins. But Robert Stewart, my team, is ahead by 3 points. And there's less than a minute left in the game. They had just scored. The ref gives me the ball, and out of the corner of my eye, I see him start counting. And I need to throw the ball in. But all I can see in front of me is the 66 jersey of Larry Blackwood, who blocks my whole field of vision. I can't see my team, I can't see the court, I can't see anything. So in desperation, as the ref keeps counting down, I just rear back and I heave the ball as hard as I can, and it hits the back of the backboard above my head, bounces off the wall behind me, and hits me in the head. O'Leary scores. Now we're just ahead by 1. The ref hands me the ball underneath the basket, and I hear the whole Robert Stewart cheering section go, "Oh no." So Coach Reynolds calls a timeout, and they replace me with this tall, athletic kid. He throws the ball in, and we beat O'Leary by 1 point, no thanks to me. So I failed in many different ways to prove myself as a man. I was coming of age during Vietnam. And there was My Lai massacre, and there was the integration of lunch counters, and cities were burning, and bras were burning, and draft cards were burning. And into this divide, I think as deep and as contentious as the divide that exists in our country today, stepped this icon of patriotism, Evel Knievel, dressed in his motorcycle leathers with his red, white, and blue cape. The wide world of sports, every Saturday afternoon at 5 o'clock, we'd turn it on to hear Kurt Gowdy say, "Traveling the world to give you the constant variety of sports, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat." You know that part. The human drama of athletic competition. This is ABC's Wide World of Sports. Of the top 10 most viewed Wide World of Sports, Evel Knievel had 7 of them. They watched him and they filmed him as he jumped over, Caesar's Palace, the cars there, and he was at Wembley Stadium and jumping over 17 semis. We had this toy made by Ideal that was an Evel Knievel toy. So you had this Energizer. It was this plastic tower that had a handle, and you'd rev it up and you'd put Evel Knievel on his motorcycle in this charger, and according to the ads on TV, he would ride off into the distance, or he'd do a loop-de-loop. In fact, when you let him go, he'd go about 6 inches and fall over. But that didn't stop us from pretending that we were Evel Knievel with our Stingray bikes and our elevated handlebars and our banana seats. We'd jump over Tonka trucks, and we'd jump over Bill Miller's little sister. And so we were pretending that we were Evel Knievel. Now, as I got older, I became a little more disenamored of him, but there was something about him that was enchanting. I remember in physics class in high school, I didn't like the math of physics, but I liked the demonstrations of physics. I mean, there were these ordinary objects that collided with each other or interacted, and somehow they were transformed or changed. Something happened. It was like a story, the demonstration. So we come into class one day, and Mr. Barris has a tennis ball in his hand, and he's throwing it up towards the ceiling and catching it, and throwing it up towards the ceiling and catching it. And he started talking about this thing called escaped velocity. He says the tennis ball accelerates out of my hand, and then the gravitational field of the earth pulls it back down to the earth. But the further it gets away from the center of the gravitational field, the weaker that field is, and the more you accelerate it, you could escape the captivity of gravity and be launched into outer space. And I was thinking about how Evel Knievel was born in Butte, Montana, a little town, sort of like my own town, and he managed to escape from that town to fame and fortune, and maybe I could learn something from him. Escape velocity, that's what I needed. So when he decided to jump the Snake River Canyon, he tried it in Arizona first, but the Department of Interior wouldn't let him jump the Grand Canyon. So he went to Idaho, to the Snake River, to try to jump it there. I was a sophomore in college at the College of Idaho, in Caldwell, Idaho. And I drove the 160 miles to be there, to be witness to this jump over the canyon. I was there on the hood of my 1963 Chevy Impala with Susie Woods, my girlfriend at the time, and we were waiting for it to happen. There were 30,000 people there. The population of Twin Falls was only about 15,000, but this was a big deal. It was being televised by the wide world of sports. And people in Twin Falls had decided, by this time we realized that Evel Knievel was sort of greed and narcissism wrapped in red, white, and blue. But this was an opportunity to put Twin Falls on the map. And we could make some money at it. So all these people came up with these economic adventures. They were going to have a vending shop for this, or hot dogs, or beer, or whatever. And they were going to make some money out of Evel Knievel's visit. So I'm sitting with Susie on the hood of my car, and we're waiting for the launch. And off in the distance, we hear this roar of a jet engine. It's really not a motorcycle. It's more like a rocket ship. And we see the smoke rising on the horizon. And then something just over the horizon pops up and then disappears. And Susie looks at me and she says, "Is that it? Is it done?" And I was sort of embarrassed to say, "Yeah, I think it is." So it was a flop. The debate still goes on today whether he chickened out or if there was a technical flaw but people in Twin Falls, Idaho today don't have a very high estimate of Evel Knievel. My friend Constance Perkins was waitress at the Holiday Inn, and she tells stories about Evel Knievel coming in with his entourage and busting up the place and being rude and leaving no tip. The security that was secured by Evel Knievel was the Hells Angels. What could go wrong with that? So they turned over a beer truck and handed out beer to everybody. And nobody made money except for the Schneider brothers. They made money because they had built 200 outhouses for the event. 123 of them were burned to the ground, but they had the foresight to insure them. And so they made money. The reporter from the Salt Lake Tribune, I'm very interested to see your program for today, the values of a hippie. That's my people. And then Woodstock. The reporter from Salt Lake called it the evil twin of Woodstock. It was Idaho's Sodom and Gomorrah. So I left the next day because I had an appointment back on campus with my major advisor, Dr. Lyle Stanford. Now, this was definitely coming back to earth. You exit off the freeway to get to the college, and if you miss the sign with your eyes, you can detect it with your nose because it's right next to the stockyards. So you exit, and then you go right, left, and through the stockyards, and the sign says, the College of Idaho, founded in 1897. I had an appointment with my advisor, Dr. Stanford. You take one look at him and you know in his electric wheelchair with his crutches beside him that he is not going to jump 17 semis. In 1947 and 48, when there was a polio epidemic, he contracted polio. But he used that time to teach himself how to paint, watercolor paints. And I think I would give my right arm to have one of his paintings, usually of the Sawtooth Mountains in central Idaho, where I loved to go hiking with my brother. I had an appointment at 2 with him. Dr. Stanford, we just had the first Earth Day in 1970. This is just a few years after that. Dr. Stanford is one of the first scientists to study this new discipline of zoology, of science, called ecology. Rather than studying individual isolated species, genus, phylum, class, individual, unique, separate from everything else, he was beginning to recognize that everything is connected in this giant web, including human beings, and we're utterly, utterly dependent on each other and the wider world. So at 2 o'clock, I go into his office just as he's lifting his legs up underneath the desk and putting his crutches beside him. And he says, "Come on in, Mr. Bland, sit down." Well, there's no place to sit in his office. Everything is covered with books and papers and specimens. He points to a chair. It's piled high with books and papers. He said, "Just set them someplace else." There's no place else to set them. He said, "Put them on the floor." I put them on the floor. I sit down and we talk. It's like he's got all the time in the world to spend with me. And we talk about Hans Tiefel's ethics class that I'm really enjoying, and we talk about organic chemistry that I'm flunking. It ends up being the place where I get called to go into ministry. God speaks to me more clearly than I've ever heard God. What in the world are you doing in this class? So it's like he's got all the time to talk with me. And then at the end of about an hour, I get up and I put the books and papers back in the chair. I start to leave, and at the door, I turn and I say, "Oh, incidentally, Dr. Stanford, I've decided to be a teacher." And he says, "Mr. Bland, come back, sit down." So I take the books and papers off the chair, I sit down. He said, "What did you say?" What? When? "Oh, I said, I'm going to be a teacher." He said, "That's not all you said." I thought about it for a while. "Oh," I said, "incidentally, I've decided I want to be a teacher." He picks up his crutch and he jabs it in the air in my direction. He said, "Mr. Bland, I never, ever, ever want to hear you say incidentally. I've decided to be a teacher. You decide to be a teacher courageously. You decide to be a teacher intentionally. You decide to be a teacher with passion. Do you understand me?" I said, "Yeah." And I got up. I put the books and papers back in the chair. I got to the door, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Bland, incidentally, I think you'll make a wonderful teacher." I graduated with a degree in zoology in 1975, and in 1976, Dr. Stanford died of a massive coronary. His gravestone is in this little town called Weiser, Idaho. Now, one of the publicity stunts that Evel Knievel used was he made this 8-foot granite tombstone in case he died in his attempt to jump over the Grand Canyon. And it became the gravestone in Butte, where he's buried today, and you can see it for a half a mile away. In contrast, Dr. Stanford's gravestone is about 8 inches off the ground. It says Dr. Lyle Stanford and dates of his birth and death, 1910 to 1976, which made him the same age that I am today, 66. And then just 3 words: teacher, artist, environmentalist. And as far as I'm concerned, he was, for me, an embodiment of freedom and responsibility. He was the measure of a man. So I'd like you to think about those people in your life that embodied either, license, freedom without responsibility, or freedom and responsibility. Who incarnated those wonderful words so that they took flesh and lived for you? Think about it, reflect on it a little bit. If you want to turn to a neighbor, take a moment and share a story about somebody in your life who made that kind of impression about freedom and responsibility. Did you think of someone?
I did.
Well, that's no fair, making Melissa Bush cry because she's the song lead.
I'm a little verklempt. But that's okay. The show must go on. Okay. So our closing hymn is 116, I'm on my way. If you rise and body your spirit, and I'll get a little less verklempt when we sing. I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
To the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way. To the freedom land.
To the freedom land.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
To the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my brother.
I asked my brother,
With me.
come and go with me.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way. If they say no,
If they say no,
I'll go anyhow.
I'll go anyhow.
If they say no,
If they say no,
I'll go anyhow.
I'll go anyhow.
If they say no,
If they say no,
I'll go anyhow.
I'll go anyhow.
I'm on my way.
Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
And I won't turn back.
And I won't turn back.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
And I won't turn back.
And I won't turn back.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
And I won't turn back.
And I won't turn back. I'm on my way.
Great God,
I'm on my way. Won't you please remain standing as we say together our chalice extinguishing words. Though we extinguish the chalice, our connection to each other and this community remains. May its light guide us this week as we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, and fill our world with compassion until we meet again.
So Spirit has taken our hearts of stone and turned them into hearts of flesh. So put your hands in front of you again, if you would. The ability of the heart to pump blood through us and inspire us is because it's responsible enough to pump and free enough to release, pump and release. Pump and release, pump and release. Spirit has given you a heart for something. I don't know what it is. Each of us different. For me, it's climate justice. For you, it might be the neighbor across the street who is going through chemotherapy. It may be kids in camps in abusive situations. Spirit has given you a heart. What has Spirit given you a heart for? I want you to call out whatever is on your heart now. How has Spirit given you a heart for
Patients with dementia.
people with dementia? Here's what I want to say. Bless your heart. Bless your heart with courage, and bless your heart with compassion, and bless your heart with love. Amen.
I'm so glad you became not